Greetings. Thank you for joining us today for the webinar entitled Hybrid Security Architectures, Web Application Firewall and DDoS. My name is Rochelle Wheeler, and I am joined today by Kurt Young. Before we begin, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. There's a questions panel located in the lower right portion of your screen. You may expand that panel at any time by clicking the plus arrow or the down arrow to see the full view. We will take questions at the end of this presentation, so you are encouraged to submit those questions in the questions panel at any time. Today's session is being recorded, and the recording will be made available upon its conclusion. I will now hand today's webinar over to Kurt. Kurt.
So for today's webinar, Hybrid Security Architectures, we'll be looking at different ways LoadMaster can be used to help mitigate threats for the applications being published. This is going to include, but it's certainly not limited to, using the Web Application Firewall functionality to help protect against distributed denial of service attacks. So for the agenda, we're going to do a quick overview of the different types of DDoS attacks being used today. We'll have an overview of LoadMaster Web Application Firewall functionality. We'll talk a bit about LoadMaster 360, which is really an extension of LoadMaster, and what that offering brings to the table as it relates to understanding what's happening from a WAF perspective. We'll then get into a demo of how to set up and configure WAF on the LoadMaster and how to access those insights on LoadMaster 360. And last, we'll look at other features available on LoadMaster to add more layers of security to help protect those published applications. So I would assume most on the call today are familiar with what LoadMaster is, but there may be some that may not be or find this webinar later and not familiar with LoadMaster. So LoadMaster is a load balancer, or really to be more accurate, a application delivery controller. Since, as you'll see during this demo, we do a lot more than just load balance connections to the applications being published. So whenever we're talking about LoadMaster, highlighting the availability, the scalability, performance, and security really always need to be highlighted, right? So from an availability standpoint, by providing that automatic failover when one or more of those backend systems are no longer functional, right? And we're doing that with some really rich health checks on it to make sure that it's just, the system may be powered on, but perhaps the application isn't running as expected. And we can do that kind of health check and take that system out of the rotation if that were to happen. Scalability. The ability to add more backend systems behind the load balancer when additional resources are necessary to handle the additional traffic load, and remove them right when they're no longer needed, and doing that seamlessly without users accessing the application knowing what's happening. LoadMasters also have the ability to intelligently distribute the traffic across those backend systems to really utilize those resources in the most efficient way. And this kind of also plays into the next bullet, right, which is around performance. Also doing SSL offloading, right, to remove that encryption overhead from those backend systems and putting that burden on the LoadMaster where it's really optimized to handle that kind of traffic, right? It's going to increase that performance of that application by doing that. And then enabling caching and compression will further reduce the load on those backend systems, providing a better experience for the user. And today's focus is, of course, about security aspects, right, such as the web application firewall, right? As I mentioned before, we'll touch on some other security features as we can add those different layers to help protect the application, such as pre-authentication, as listed here. So since the title of this webinar is around hybrid security architectures, I thought it'd be beneficial to highlight where the LoadMaster fits into the different environments. So starting off with on-premises. So whether you're running everything in your data center, right, and you're doing that either on hardware appliances or virtual appliances, or you're running some on premises and some in the public cloud, right, in that hybrid model. Many organizations are leveraging multiple clouds, right, based on different requirements. And finally, the move to microservices, right, Kubernetes. Many may not be aware that LoadMaster can be deployed as an ingress controller for Kubernetes. So whether your organization fits into one of these or all of these, right, LoadMaster can provide that availability, that scalability, performance, and security for those published applications. So let's talk a little bit about distributed denial of service attacks. So looking at the network layer attacks first. These attacks have been around forever and still causing disruption today. The first documented case, right back in like the late 90s, 96 time frame, when an internet service provider was taken down for several days with SYN flood attacks. But yeah, again, I'm not going to go through each one of these different kind of attacks, since really, at the end of the day, the approach is really similar, and the outcome is the same, where we're really trying to overload the system so legitimate requests can no longer be serviced by the application. Now, LoadMaster has some built-in capabilities in the network processing engine, which will help mitigate some of these type of network layer DDoS attacks, right? The LoadMaster networking processing engine, it looks into an attempted connection, right, before sending that back to the real servers, and it looks for things like protocol correctness, looking to ensure everything looks legitimate, from looking at the header, the URL, the method that's being requested, and will mitigate the impact of such attacks by dropping some of those connections if they don't look legitimate. There's some other components on the LoadMaster along with the network processing engine that can help address these attacks, such as even doing TLS termination, right, terminating those connections, and validating, right, that the TLS request is legitimate. Using whitelists and blacklists, right, to restrict who has access to the application. Doing things like rate limiting, right, and I'll cover that a little bit later, where we can limit the amount of connections per client. And of course, our web application firewall, which is going to further protect that application. Which brings us to application layer attacks, right? Since really most perimeter security appliances, such as firewalls, they work on the network layer, so it's difficult for them to identify threats that are running in the application layer. So again, I'm not here to say that a load balancer is a full-blown security appliance, but since we're working on the application layer, it can be used to help identify these type of attacks using features such as the web application firewall. So the WAF feature is enabled for published application and can help identify patterns in the requests that are tied to these type of denial of services, right, and dropping those connections to preventing them from hitting those backend systems. So, slow LoRa's attack, as an example, which is an incomplete HTTP request, right, geared to keeping connections open over a long period of time, and therefore exhausting the overall available connections available for legitimate users. So again, since we're looking at the HTTP traffic, in that case on the WAF, we can see these incomplete HTTP requests, and we can drop those connections, therefore allowing connections to be available for those legitimate users. So let's look at how, right, LoadMaster WAF can be used to help mitigate these type of attacks. So again, the LoadMaster WAF can be enabled on one or more applications being published on the LoadMaster, right? And the rules used to help secure the application are built off the OWASP Top 10 and the core rule set. So if anyone's unfamiliar with OWASP, they're a nonprofit foundation, which is community-led. I think there's like tens of thousands of members worldwide. And their goal is really just to improve the security of software. In addition to those predefined rules from OWASP, custom rules can be created and enabled for those published applications on the LoadMaster. And there's also several knobs and dials that can be adjusted to fine-tune the behavior of the WAF, and I'll demonstrate that in just a few minutes. A lot of these are going to be able to avoid all those false positives that you may be getting, and I'll show you how that's done. So I did want to spend a few minutes to highlight LoadMaster 360 and the value it brings regarding the insights to the web application firewall behavior. But let's do a little bit of an overview of what LoadMaster 360 is. So LoadMaster 360 really extends the functionality of LoadMaster to give operators really deep insights into the health, performance, availability, and of course the security of LoadMasters. It's a SaaS offering, right? We released this a little bit over a year ago. And using these 6 areas, we can really sum up the value of LoadMaster 360 and what it delivers with this consolidated view. So starting at the bottom with usability and experience. A lot of work was done, and not just on the look and feel of LoadMaster, but really optimize workflows to get you access to the information you need, to the point where even non-experts can really navigate and consume insights with ease. Certificate lifecycle, right, to understand the health of the certificates used in the environment. Making sure you're on top of when certificates are set to expire, right, giving you ample time to get them renewed, right. The last thing you need is a certificate expiring and taking down the application, right, which always happens, at the worst possible time. Application analytics, right, providing rich dashboards for monitoring the performance, health, and security of the applications and the LoadMasters running in front of those applications. Configuration management is being worked on currently, where you'll have the ability to automate deployments and configurations of the LoadMasters in your fleet. Incident management, right? So issues, they're going to occur, right? That we can't avoid altogether. But having access to context-rich alerts help you address them more effectively, and in many cases, proactively, right? Before users even see the impact, you get those kind of alerts to address those problems. And last, and certainly not least, right? Application security monitoring and tuning, which is all about the topic of this webinar, right? Which is really all about, in this case with LoadMaster 360, is the enhanced WAF capabilities. So this past summer, we released these enhanced WAF capabilities on LoadMaster 360, providing detailed dashboards of activity over time of really tangible evidence of events and overall performance of the WAF. You can view these security insights on an application-by-application basis, or see all events that's happening on the LoadMaster instance. So, and not only can we show the rules that are being triggered and the source of those events, but we've implemented a smart rule tuner, which will help address those false positives to ensure that legitimate traffic is being allowed to the application. And once again, I'll demonstrate that next. So with that, let's take a look. So we'll start off in LoadMaster, where we have 3 virtual services publishing this application. One of which has WAF enabled. We also have this fourth virtual service, which is really just a redirect, sending all port 80 traffic to 443, forcing those connections that come in and try to come in on port 80 to go to 443. But before we get into the configuration settings of WAF for this virtual service, take a look at the global settings for Web Application Firewall. So under access settings, here's where we can enable the updates of those OWASP CRS rules. And you have the ability to do that automatically on a daily basis, or you can do it manually. And you can also, kind of show changes that are happening on those rule sets. Now we have it unchecked, and as you can see here, we got a nice warning saying that last time we did it was September 9th, so we're 62 days old, and we should really consider doing an update on those rules. You see the version that we're currently running, and then also step one is to download those updates, and step two would be to install them. So you can schedule when you want them installed, either doing it automatic or doing it manually by clicking Install Now. Last here we have an IP access list data file. So this is a list of IP addresses used with the IP reputation setting that we'll see later in the WAF configuration. And this is a list of IP addresses that are less trustworthy based on past behavior. So, certainly some malicious IP addresses here that you don't want accessing your application. So we can go ahead and enable IP reputation, which we'll see later, which will block access to the application coming from these sources. Exporting logs. So here we can export logs in a couple different formats. We have a native format we can use. You can send it, export them via JSON format, or you can send export logs to Splunk using the remote URI here to your Splunk environment, if you're running Splunk in your environments. Custom rules. So we're talking about custom rules as far as building out custom rules to prevent false positives, things like that. You can build custom rules to block traffic based on different criteria. So here's where you can manage all of the custom rules that you're enabling on your WAF. Then we have false positive analysis. So here you can select the virtual service that you have set up on that has WAF enabled, and you can see some really detailed information about what's happening from a false positive perspective. There's a lot of information here, so a lot to parse through. For a novice user, it would be again a little bit more difficult for them to leverage this information, to understand what's happening, and to use that information to adjust the settings on the WAF. And we'll see how we've taken that to the next level with LoadMaster 360 and our WAF rule tuner. So we'll see that next in LoadMaster 360. So now let's go and look at that virtual service configuration. So I'm going to go ahead and modify this virtual service. And we'll see just dropping down this WAF section here. We'll see we have it enabled. There's audit mode, so you can turn on audit mode, which will generate logs. Now, when you have this set to audit all, it's going to generate a lot of logs. So you really want to be careful about always having that set. If you're troubleshooting something, it's great to have, but typically it generates a lot of logs. So you want to be careful of how long and not just keeping it on all the time. The anomaly scoring threshold here of 5. So this is a very low threshold that would be set. And the way that this works is as requests come in and rules are being triggered for those requests, each one of those requests will get a score. Typically, the score is around, for each request would be around 5 for a typical rule. Some more, some a little less. When the total score of those requests meet or exceed the threshold here, the traffic will be blocked. So having a score of 5, if one rule is triggered, it's going to block the connection. We did that because for demo purposes, we wanted to see some blocked connections and things like that to populate, as we see later on, the LoadMaster 360 dashboard widgets and things like that. By default, the threshold is at 100. You could raise it up to 10,000. So you want to be careful about where you're setting this threshold. Certainly don't want it too low because you'll be blocking legitimate traffic. You don't want it too high where you may not be blocking malicious attempts at your application. The paranoia level we'll look at in the advanced settings next. Then we have the requests. So here we can check, enable or disable request rules here, as well as enabling custom rules. And then we have some workloads that are included as well that you can go ahead and select to protect those rules that will be used to protect them. And within here, as you can see, there's many rules within each one of these drop downs, so you can get very granular about what you want to set or disable. This IP reputation blocking, this is the checkbox that you would just check to use that list to block connections coming from IP addresses from that list. Under advanced settings, here's where we can get even a little bit more granular about what we want to inspect. So here, whether we want to inspect post request bodies, whether we want to enable JSON parser, XML parser, whether we want to process HTTP responses or just requests, and then the paranoia level. So this setting is between 1 and 4. 1 being the most common WAF rules that should be enabled to help protect the application. As you start increasing the paranoia level to 2, 3, and 4, you're enabling more strict WAF rules, which could cause some legitimate traffic to be blocked as you start raising that. It's a higher likelihood that could happen. So you want to be careful about just coming right into the WAF and saying, I want to set my paranoia level to 4 because I want to make sure I don't that traffic is blocked. You want to be careful about that, right? There's a happy medium, so to speak, sometimes, unless you've really tweaked your WAF and you really understand the requests that should be coming in and things like that. The executing paranoia level can be used to increase it, and you can go ahead and increase this higher and see what's being blocked, but traffic that's being blocked based on the paranoia level of the executing paranoia level won't add to the anomaly score, right? So you don't really need to worry about legitimate traffic being blocked, but you'll see that they are being triggered. So that'll give you kind of like a what if, right? What if I changed it to 3? What if I changed it to 4? What would happen? So you can use that executing paranoia level to see what the effect would be. And then down here we have countries to block. So we'll look at how we can leverage this capability in conjunction with LoadMaster 360 and the information we're getting from it. With that, let's jump into LoadMaster 360 and have a look. So here's the initial dashboard you would come into when you log into LoadMaster 360. Gives you an overview of kind of the application health, of if anything's down, if there's any warnings, the LoadMaster health, whether again things are up and running healthy, whether we have one that's in critical state here, and then some detailed information about those, right? So there's an unreachable one, and it's turned off, and then down here we have some more information about incidents, as well as expiring certificates. As you can see here, we have 2 certificates that have expired, so I should really take my own advice as to keeping an eye on this stuff. But it's a lab environment, so we're not in too much danger of an application being down and affecting the business. So anyhow, we can go ahead and drill into these to get some more information. So this is the LoadMaster we were just on. From the LoadMaster 360 perspective, seeing kind of it's healthy, it's up and running. There's one resolved issue in the incident center. Just some general information about IP address and the site it's in, the model, subscription, the license, and some information about the CPU memory usage and connections that are happening. So this lab environment, we're not generating a whole lot of traffic to it. We do have a traffic simulator, so it's just kind of trickling in some connections to, as I said before, trigger some WAF alerts. And then the LoadMaster Health, so we could see over the course of 7 days of, whether it was available. Here we had 3 minutes of downtime, and some other information down here about total LoadMaster connections. So as I said, we have traffic simulator that's so this is obviously quite even every day because it's expected traffic that's coming in here. But in a production environment, you see a lot of changes day to day based on application access. But what we really want to see is the WAF insights here. So if I jump into WAF insights on this LoadMaster, we can see these widgets on top providing some information about the top 10 executed rules, top 10 block requests by IP, and then top 10 block requests by URL. And then a summary over here of total requests and block requests and the percentage of that, as well as false positives over the last 24 hours. Down here we have our false positive activity, and I'm going to come back to this to kind of dig into the Smart Rule Tuner. Down here we could see events by location, right, on our map here. So here you can drill into different regions. So as an example, I can go into South America. And as this refreshes, we can get some detail on what parts of South America this traffic is being generated from. What's the source of the connections coming in from here? So we have 2 locations, Colombia and Brazil. You can hover over there and see the total block requests that are coming from there. Now, in the event that this was kind of an internal application and we didn't have an office in Brazil, and we wanted there's no reason why connections should be coming from Brazil to this application, we can go in and, as we saw before with this countries to block, we can go ahead and block. Let's go down here, find Brazil, and we go ahead and block Brazil from just drop connections when those connections come in from Brazil. Now going to the Smart Rule Tuner. So here, if we go into the tuning engine here, and I'm going to select this one as an example, this private IP address. So as this populates over on the side here, we can get some detailed information about this traffic that's coming in. So we can see that it sees it as a SQL injection attack, right, on keyword either alter or union. You can see the parameter, this args q. And then we can see here that this 12 union was found. And you can see over here in the input, right, in the detailed information, you can see that there was 12 union was found in this args q 12 Union Street. So this could be a very harmless search or something on this web page, on this PHP page, for this address of 12 Union Street, right? But yet it was flagged as a SQL injection because of union being in as a keyword. So we may say this is obviously very harmless, and we want to make sure that requests like this are not blocked on the WAF. So we want to create a custom rule to prevent this from happening again. So down here, what we can do is we have a few options of the rule. So this, by default, this startup by rule, we could just disable the rule. We can put this in there. It's going to remove this rule ID and say don't block traffic based on this rule. Now, that may not be the best idea. In some cases, maybe that is the right approach. But in some cases, you may say, well, I don't want to block that rule altogether because later on down the road, right, there could be some SQL injection attacks that are real, and you don't want to allow that traffic to go through and not be blocked. So we can get a little bit more specific about the rule. So if I change it to startup by target, now we're saying, well, we only want to block or we only want to allow traffic to the application if this rule is triggered, if the parameter is in the argsq parameter, as we see here for this search. And then it will be enabled for all other attempts if some SQL injection attack was happening. We can go down and go runtime by rule. So what this is going to do is this is going to look at this specific page and say, okay, so I want to just disable this rule on this page, and I don't want it to trigger if this again, rule is seen on this page. We can go even further, right, in runtime by target. Now what we can do here, as you see refresh, now we're saying that we want to look at this page only, and we also want to look at the argsq parameter. So only when those two are in the triggered rule do we want to let that traffic go through. So what you can do is you can go ahead and copy this rule out of here, and then we can go ahead and create a custom rule on the LoadMaster to prevent that from happening again. So again, it's not so much a set it and forget it kind of approach on the web application firewall. There's certainly some monitoring and things you should be doing to make sure that it is optimized. And LoadMaster 360 with its enhanced WAF capabilities really help you get those insights much clearer to make those adjustments better. So let's go back to our deck here. And let's talk a little bit about the layered security. What else is available on LoadMaster? And again, we're not limited to this additional layered security, but we just wanted to highlight a few things as part of this webinar. So starting off with LoadMaster's ability to rate limit traffic, right? It's going to provide that fair and balanced access to resources available on those backend systems. By setting maximum connections or bandwidth limits, right, it's going to prevent any system or systems, right? We can do it by network, we could do it by a specific IP address, any systems that are accessing the application from sending too many requests. Right, certainly helpful to address potential denial of service attacks, but also helpful to address any maybe internal applications that may be misbehaving as well, right, and overloading published applications. So as an example, if LoadMaster is publishing some API endpoints and you have a poorly written application to start sending excessive amount of connections, which could cause performance issues for other applications that need access to that API. Or worse, right, having that rogue application, take down that API endpoint because of the amount of connections. So, lots of configuration options and flexibility to rate limit certain traffic, again, based on IP, based on network, even based on using regex to look at URLs or looking at hosts and things like that. So, again, a lot of options when it comes to rate limiting, and a nice addition to help prevent those kind of excessive connections happening on the application. So doing pre-authentication on the LoadMaster, so forcing authentication to happen before allowing access to those application servers on the back end. This, of course, would require that the application on the back end or whatever is being published would support doing some pre-authentication, but certainly would be tremendously helpful around denial of service attacks. Whether or not you have using local or cloud identity providers, a lot of options there of what you can use. I know a lot of customers are using Azure Entra as an IDP. In which case we have an integrated solution that's in the app gallery in Azure that you can go ahead and enable within Azure Entra. I still want to call it Azure AD all the time. It's still having a problem, so apologize for that. But yeah, a lot of options. If you can enable pre-authentication, again, adding that layer will certainly help in many instances. To help protect the application a little bit more. And this last one is an interesting one, right? Zero Trust Access Gateway. So I'm sure many are familiar with the concept of zero trust, right? Using these principles to tighten down the security within the infrastructure. So this concept of access gateway is using built-in functionality of LoadMaster, right? To build out rules and policies in a very specific way to provide least privileged access to the application being published. With the use of, we have these content rules, which can look at details of the traffic. For example, information within the HTTP header, and just take certain action on it, right? So in this example, we're publishing S3 storage, and we have these 3 networks that all have access to the same shared bucket. Now, systems in these networks are defined by security zones, right? From security zone 1 on top there being the least secure, to security zone 3 at the bottom being the most secure. So by looking at each of the requests accessing the storage, we can see from the HTTP header, right, the source of the IP address, the method that's being requested, whether they're looking for a read, a write, or a get, or a delete, and the bucket that's being requested. So with this information, we can restrict access to only reads or gets from that least secure network on the top. But the other 2 networks, we can allow puts and deletes as an example, since they're more trusted, and we don't want perhaps that least privileged environment writing any malicious data, or something up there that could affect other applications that are accessing that same bucket. So there's a lot of different use cases that could be customized and implemented with this functionality, like even using the pre-authentication capabilities highlighted in the prior slide as an example, and taking action based on who is requesting access. Should they have access to a certain part of an application or not? So get really, really granular about who has access to what, and things like that. So a lot around this that we can implement based on different use cases. Okay, so that brings us to the end. So we're going to go ahead and kick things off with Q&A.
Okay. I do see a question here. Is there documentation on creating custom WAF rules? So yes, we do have documentation on progress docs, progress.com, which the WAF rules are created with mod security. It's a mod security engine, so it's based on mod security. So we have some detailed information about how to create those WAF rules on our documentation site. I'm still going through some of these to. Okay, let me go through here. Okay, here's another one. Okay, okay, so can we enable WAF on LoadMasters running in public cloud? So short answer is yes. You can enable WAF on LoadMaster running in public cloud. You can actually enable WAF on any LoadMaster model. So whether you're in hardware, virtual, or cloud. The way that LoadMaster you can enable WAF is through the tiers, right? So we have a standard, enterprise, and enterprise plus. So with Enterprise Plus, you would have to enable WAF. So whether that's in cloud, again, hardware or virtual, you can enable WAF on any model of LoadMaster.
Kurt, question
Yes.
for you. Is there an audit-only mode for WAF? We don't currently use it, but would like to. However, concerned it may block legitimate traffic on the live services. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the audit mode on the WAF configuration is really about the logging of WAF, right? But if you wanted to enable WAF but didn't want to block traffic, you could raise the threshold setting like really, really high. This way, WAF rules could be triggered, but it'd be unlikely that the score would ever hit that high setting, and therefore would just allow all traffic through. Then you can always come back around and lower that setting as you got more comfortable. So that would really be the best way to enable WAF, again, to get that comfort level before you started to block traffic.
And then there was just a general question in regards to whether the webinar was concentrating on LoadMaster solely or LoadMaster and LoadMaster 360.
Yeah, well, whenever we're talking about WAF, right, it's really necessary to talk about LoadMaster 360. So it was not exclusively for LoadMaster 360, but certainly whenever we're talking about WAF, with the Enhanced WAF that we enabled on LoadMaster 360, it really, as hopefully you were able to see and hear, hopefully on the webinar, that it adds so much more value with the insights we're providing on LoadMaster 360 as it pertains to WAF. So I mean, you could do, obviously have WAF without LoadMaster 360, but we really wanted to make sure everyone was well aware of the Enhanced WAF. We really believe it's going to give you those necessary insights on how the WAF is behaving in a much clearer way. Because again, you really couldn't build that kind of visualizations in LoadMaster itself. That's why LoadMaster 360 is really an integral part of the LoadMaster solution.
So Kurt, question for you. Is there any recommended WAF rule set for Exchange 2019 CAS services?
The best thing I would say is that you would work with our support team or professional services team on those type of rules. There was a time where we had some of those other workloads. Now, actually, I'm going to take that back. There is some best practices we've actually enabled. I'm not sure if we published it yet. I have to follow back up on that. But we are. Some of you may be aware about the use of LoadMaster templates. So LoadMaster template is a file you can download from the Progress site and upload it to the LoadMaster based on a workload, whether it's SharePoint, Exchange in this example. And we do have a template which is enables to set up Exchange with WAF enabled, which has some rules that are used, kind of some best practice. But you can, again, also work with our support team, professional services team on tweaking those settings. But we do have, and I think it's been released, an updated template which does have the WAF settings included in the template. So when you spin up that template, those WAF rules are already embedded in it. So yes.
Another question for you. How do I configure WAF to respond to unusually high traffic requests from a single IP? Like unusually high amount of get head post requests from a single IP within, say, 10 minutes?
Well, you can do that in a few ways. So with WAF, you would most likely create a custom. You could possibly create a custom rule, which would look at that specifically. But kind of going back to using rate limiting, something like this could be interesting if you're just looking at restricting the amount of high traffic requests from a single IP address. That's really where the rate limiting would really come in. I mean, I suppose you could use WAF in that example. I don't know the exact WAF rule that you would create for that, but certainly using the rate limiting functionality on LoadMaster would be the way to look at that. And also in addition, depending on whether or not you're able to create something, I would have to think about this around that zero trust access. If we can create some custom rules based on this, obviously understanding the source IP address that it's coming from, also understanding the method that you're using within the header, and whether or not you were able to, you could direct that traffic to what we call a sub-virtual service, and then do rate limiting on that. So I think there's a way you could do that in a few ways, right? Aside from WAF, but I'd have to think about that a little bit more. But certainly rate limiting and possibly the zero trust approach could be leveraged.
Okay. Do you see any additional questions on your end, Kurt?
I'm not seeing any more. No, that's it. Just the one that we have flagged to get back around the audit only mode.
Perfect. Okay. Okay. Well, if there are no additional questions, that would conclude today's session. And we thank you for joining us today. Again, we apologize for the sound issues, but we do thank you for hanging in there. And as I mentioned, we will send the pre-recorded webinar out so you have the optimal sound. And Daniel, we will circle back with you regarding the question that you had. So we thank you all. Kurt, thank you for plugging through this in your hotel room with one screen.
Yeah.
Thank you. And we wish everyone a great remainder of your day.
Thanks, everyone.